He is Peter King here on the Rich Eisen Show. How are you, Peter?
Everything's good, Rich. How are you?
I'm great. So let's jump right into it here. How did the Cutler stuff come together, best you can tell?
You know, after Ryan Tannehill got hurt on Thursday at practice, they didn't know how serious it was at first, but not long after that, Adam Gase called Jay Cutler and basically said, "Do you have interest?" And he says, "Yeah, I have interest, but I want to think about it," obviously. And then he thought about it, I'm told, for 48 hours. He was serious about doing this TV, and he thought that it was a good transition to his next career. But there's probably one guy who, if he makes that phone call, Jay Cutler is very, very likely to say yes to. And that's Adam Gase. In 2015, obviously, Adam Gase coaching the offensive coordinator for Chicago. Jay Cutler played very disciplined football, had all things considered his best season with a high rating, only 11 interceptions. And I think that he basically decided, especially after the money was fairly right, $10 million and $3 million in pretty makeable incentives. Cutler said, I've got to do this because I'll always wonder what it would have been if I didn't do it.
Yeah, Tony Romo, with Romo being the A-game analyst next to an all-world person and talent like Jim Nantz, that's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. There'll always be a three-man booth at Fox that they want to put him in, I imagine. So that's one thing. But the relationship with Gase, why do you think these two guys get along in a way that Cutler and other coaches supposedly have not?
I think in part because Adam Gase, basically having been around a lot of good quarterbacks in his life, Adam Gase is kind of, you wouldn't know it by just looking at him on television, but he's commanding presence. And he demands from his players, that you do it absolutely the right way. And I think when he went into Chicago, that's what he demanded. And if you ask Mike Shanahan, Jay Cutler is fine with being coached. He likes being coached. And I think that was the big thing here, that Cutler was coached to be a very disciplined, quarterback making the right reads. And I think Cutler felt he was a very good fit with Gase.
Well, Peter King joining me here in the Honda Insider Report. Now comes the fact that they play in the New England Patriots division. How does this work football-wise, do you think, Peter?
Well, if Cutler goes 0-2 against the Patriots and has one touchdown and 5 interceptions in the 2 games, quite honestly, his signing by the Dolphins in all likelihood will be a failure. Or his tenure there will be a failure. And he's got to find a way to play. Look, I think everybody who looks at this on the surface thinks that basically with the receivers that Miami has, it's going to be bombs away football. But I can tell you this: the way that Adam Gase wants to call the game has more to do with Jay Ajayi than it does with the 3 receivers combined. You realize that last year, when Gase called 50% runs or more in a game, Miami was 7-0. This is a good running team that gets Mike Pouncey back. Jay Cutler is going to be more of a complementary player than a dominant mad bomber.
And before we move on from this topic here, Peter, in that 48-hour period where Cutler was seriously considering this and also seriously considering staying on course with Fox, the other options for the Dolphins that I read about range from Kaepernick to Tim Tebow. Was that real?
I don't think that they made a call to Tebow or did. Let me just say this, Rich. If Mike Tannenbaum considered Tim Tebow after what happened with the New York Jets, he ought to have his head examined. And I saw that somewhere, and I asked a few people there, or I asked a few people about this, and they don't think that it's true. Now, I'm not saying it's categorically not true, but all I can say is Mike Tannenbaum, who he and Gase made this decision. Mike Tannenbaum has had his fill of Tim Tebow, and I say that not being critical of it, but he realizes that you're not winning, you're not going to the playoffs with Tim Tebow right now.
Well,
not to mention the fact he hasn't played football in 100 years.
Well, well, clearly, though, they feel like maybe they can't make the playoffs with Matt Moore, and then the idea that Christian Ponder might be brought in instead of Colin Kaepernick is really something that flies in the face. Now, you can't say anymore.
Understand this, Rich.
Yeah.
Rich, understand this when the Kaepernick thing comes up, all right? So if Colin Kaepernick had been the guy signed by Miami, he would have come in at the beginning anyway as a backup quarterback, okay? So you have to ask yourself, because Matt Moore knows this offense. He's been there. He played well. He's just very, he's not durable. But he played pretty well last year in several games, but he also has been concussed. So you don't know about his future. But the big difference with Kaepernick, do you want to bring a guy in as a backup and basically then take this month to try to teach him your offense, whether it be Kaepernick or Ponder, because both of those guys would have come in as a backup quarterback, and Matt Moore would have been the starter. And the reason why you have to come in with somebody is that, you don't want to have David Fales one snap away from being your quarterback on a team that potentially could win double digits and be a very strong playoff contender. So you've got to bring in some veteran guy, whoever it's going to be. And I would agree with those who would say that it was probably going to be Ponder, but I don't know that for sure.
A couple more minutes here with Peter King here on the Rich Eisen Show. And the last time that we saw a quarterback injury bring about somebody that was brought in last moment and who supposedly knew the offense, it was last year with Sam Bradford, who went into a division with a 12 atop it, just like Cutler now in New England. You chatted with Aaron Rodgers. What were your impressions with Aaron Rodgers entering yet another season for the Packers with so many high hopes?
Very happy, very much at peace with himself, as happy with his physical condition as he has been since he's entered the NFL. Did a lot of yoga, did a lot of stretching work this offseason. Rich, a lot of times I go into a place like Green Bay and I'll have a few minutes with Rodgers, and I'll always ask really good players, what did you do this offseason to get better? Because who knows what they did, and sometimes it's an interesting answer. And he said, basically, being one full year on this diet where everything I put in my body is good, and getting heavily into yoga and getting a stretching regimen that I think is going to help me last for, as he said in his words, and I quote him exactly, 7, 8, 9, or 10 more years, because that's how much longer he wants to play.
You also went into Seattle, too, and I loved reading about that. Give your 2 cents to those who have yet to read your MMQB about what you...
Well, I think the ESPN story by Seth Wickersham, although that they do their best to minimize it and to bury it, it's still on their minds. Richard Sherman talked to me, and I don't want to say he was bitter about it, but he's just really unhappy at this perception that he hates Russell Wilson and that he has no respect for him and all that. And he told me that the day I was at practice, he said, I yelled worse things at Doug Baldwin than I yelled at Russell Wilson. So you got to know who we are, and you got to know how we compete out there. And that could very well be. But I thought last year what Sherman did with Darrell Bevell was flat out wrong on the sidelines. And I just, Rich, I just don't like the fact that this is such a ridiculously chippy team in practice during training camp. I mean, Frank Clark is borderline out of control. It was hard to control him the day that I was there, and then I saw that later in the week he got kicked out of practice for a day for having another fight. And I just, this is not the National Fighting League. It's the National Football League, and the Seahawks got to settle down.
Last one for you, Peter, here in the Honda Insider Report. I know you're a selector, Pro Football Hall of Fame, and you are just like me and everybody else. We love the speeches. We love the journey told and the journey now completed for so many men. But it's wrong to have Kurt Warner out there at 10 after 11 at night. How How do you see this being fixed? Because right now the Friday jacket ceremony is a lot more concise and it's a lot more emotional, to be honest with you. These guys cry on Friday night and then Saturday they tell their speeches.
Look, Rich, I mean, I just think that the NFL or the Pro Football Hall of Fame has got to get a handle on the length of these speeches. You know, these speeches ought to be 20 or 22 minutes long. You cannot thank every football coach you've ever had in your life. You can't thank every person who's done something for you in your life. I'm sorry. You just can't do that. I mean, it's time for the Hall of Fame to set a hard and fast limit. I think 20 or 22 minutes is plenty. And although I love, and LaDainian Tomlinson's speech was the best of the lot, you know, that was 25 minutes. And so easily you can get 3 or 4 minutes out of that speech. But all I'm saying, Rich, is that I love watching these things because it's really, so many of them are so inspirational. But honestly, I think it was ridiculously unfair. I wasn't there. You were there. But I heard there were like 400 people left when Kurt Warner was finishing his speech.
It's true.
I mean, that's utterly preposterous. It's totally unfair to Kurt Warner, you know, to basically be speaking to a studio audience, and that's it, and his family. I mean, it's ridiculously unfair, and I think, you know, I love the Hall of Fame, but they got to do something about this.
Peter, thanks for the time. Appreciate it. Before you go, ask him the poll question real quick. I'd love to get his 2 cents on it, Brockman.
Hey, Peter, who makes more starts this year at quarterback? Jay Cutler, Mike Glennon, Tom Savage, Brock Osweiler.
What do you think?
Jay Cutler, easy. I mean, you know, Brock Osweiler, I don't think is starting for the Browns, and I don't think that Tom Savage makes it through the year. I think this is going to be Deshaun Watson's team by midseason.
Peter, love to chat with you always. We'll chat down the line, certainly later on this month.
Thanks a lot, Rich.
You got it. That's Peter King, again, the MMQB. Check it out.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on radio stations across the country and audience.
If you like that video, be sure to download our app, and I'll be sure to help the NFL figure out what a catch is.